Fiction Writing Basics can be downloaded from www.mjvliterary.com and www.mattmcavoy.com. Hello, I'm Matt McAvoy and this is Fiction Writing Basics, Genre and the 3-Act Formula. By now, you should have a better idea of why you're writing your book, who it's aimed at and which format it's best suited to. So I'm now going to talk a little bit about genres and the standard story structure, or the formula, which is most commonly applied to them. I'm sure you're all aware, but for those of you which aren't, genre is a word of French origin, and the Oxford Dictionary's definition of the word genre is a style or category of art, music or literature. Which genre your book falls into is very straightforward. Fiction itself is a genre. Within fiction, the most common genres are fantasy, sci-fi, drama, horror, mystery, romance, young adult, historical, children's, crime, fairy tale, comics and graphic novels, poetry, detective, war, spy thrillers, general thrillers, paranormal, supernatural, mythology, erotic, chick lit, comedy, real life, political, pulp, satire, action, adventure, and LGBT. My apologies if I've left any out, but please bear in mind that any one of these genres can also be broken down into subgenres, just like a family tree. The subgenres usually comprise of others, which are in the list I've just read out, that now come under the umbrella of that category as subcategories. And new genres are being created by authors and artists all the time. There's an old saying, there's nothing new under the sun, so I think it's fair to say that when new genres are created, it's usually because authors have found more creative ways to cross genres and create hybrids. New genres may also have become mainstream due to changes in the social climate. For example, and I choose this example simply because it makes the point more conveniently, there are now a whole new list of LGBT categories, which have now become mainstream genres, when previously they would have been subgenres within the category of LGBT generally. Knowing which genre your book falls under, and I'm sure you all do, is very important because, just like purpose in the last lesson, it invokes in the reader different expectations of your writing style and formatting. Now, at this point, I would like to intervene and say there is no harm whatsoever in crossing genres. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that if it's done well, genre ambiguity can be a very satisfying thing. One good example of this which springs to mind is the book The Lovely Bones, which crosses melodrama, supernatural and crime thriller to great effect. Personally, I love to see books which cross genres, and the more unexpected the better. But the key words in this have to be if it's done well. Crossing genres is not an uncommon thing for authors to do, but it is safe to say that unfortunately many of those attempts don't work at all. I won't go into too much detail about specific genres, because as we've just seen, the number of genres available is probably infinite, and it's also a very objective thing. So for reasons of simplicity, I'm going to evaluate a few of the more mainstream ones. Namely, how do they affect your writing, your format, and how do you structure the story? I think it will come as little surprise that light-hearted books, comedy, romance, chick lit, they do tend to contain more dialogue. Because they tend to be read more often by women, they are often written to be more portable, as a woman is more likely to carry a book with her than a man. Therefore, shorter, punchier sentences and quicker chapters may be favoured in these genres. Similarly, an equally flippant writing style may be suitable for pulp, action, and adventure books. Although this type of book is generally considered a more male reader orientated genre, its readership may also be more likely to read the book portably. Arguably, the genres I've just mentioned are usually, though not always, less intellect intensive, so they can be consumed in small snippets which don't require a great amount of concentration. In contrast to this, as I mentioned in the last lesson, books which fall within the more epic genres, historical, mythological, otherworld fantasy, are expected to be long and detailed, as are, to some extent, science fiction books. Once again, I'll suggest that the creation of entire worlds is something which requires immense attention to detail, time investment, long word counts, and credible research on the part of the author. I'd argue that the same is also true of political, espionage, military and investigation thrillers, which are usually genres that I would suggest are more likely to require concentration, solitude, and are more likely to grip the reader into long, in-depth reading sessions. Horror books and the supernatural, they're a little different to other genres, in the respect that they may appeal to a much wider, more diverse audience. They're equally popular to male and female audiences, are increasingly likely to cross genres, such as sci-fi, LGBT, erotica, and are arguably one of the few genres more likely to be tried out by fans of other genres. For example, a reader of crime mysteries won't typically pick up a romance novel, and it's unlikely that a fan of otherworld fantasy or steampunk sci-fi will regularly delve into harrowing, traumatic family drama. Horror, at least I would argue, is a genre which often appeals to all types of reader. This is probably because of its versatility, its ability to encapsulate so many different possibilities and so many different writing styles. Again, another point I mentioned in the last lesson is that horror is one of the darker genres, obviously, and it has the potential to trap the reader in a nightmarish scenario, or toy with them in short, punchy chapters, all entirely at the pleasure of the author. One thing I can say from personal experience is that writing horror is a lot of fun, and it also gives you a lot of creative freedom. Whichever genre your book falls within, you'll know as the author how mainstream you want it to be, or in contrast, how unique. Sadly, formula works from a sales point of view, and this is enough to satisfy many authors. I say sadly, because we all want to write something original. Unfortunately, in my experience, very few of us actually do, at least not successfully. It's not like the 1970s when censorship came tumbling down and everything started to become mainstream. Brave new authors became famous for creating unique stories and genres, such as Stephen King. Those days were over. Now, unfortunately, it's the opposite way around. It's more likely that you need to be famous before you can successfully try something new. And the only way to achieve success, it would seem nowadays, whether it's in literature, music, or film, is by adhering to formula. By all means, throw the 3-act formula out of the window. I'll open it for you. But bear in mind, people love their love interest, their formidable adversary, their end-of-act cliffhangers, and their happy endings. If you choose to deviate from this, of course that's your choice, but if you're successful at it, it's probably going to be because you're writing in a genre which doesn't rely on the 3-act formula. Either that, or you've just created something very, very good. Personally, I love to see deviation from the formula. I love to see ambiguously polar characters, first-person monologue and non-linear timelines. But I understand you can get away with all of these deviations a lot more easily with some genres than you can with others. For example, as I mentioned in the introduction, short stories need no formula whatsoever. They just need to be good. epic genres, historical and otherworld, can be set over long periods of time with an ensemble cast, so they too might be completely unsuited to the 3-act formula. Books which are reflective of real life, such as procedural thrillers, political, operational, or drama in almost any context, they may appear completely unrealistic when they're structured within a standard 3-act formula. Look what happens when TV soaps try to incorporate mainstream storylines. They lose all credibility. But it stands to reason that the more you constrain your work to the 3-act formula, the more likely you are to destabilise its credibility. I can hear you screaming at me now in frustration about the 3-act formula. This brings us up nicely to the title subject. What is the 3-act formula? Or, as it may also be known, the 3-act structure. Although more traditionally present in the media of plays and film, this structure is probably more and more nowadays relevant in fiction novels, and is definitely noticeably more applicable to some genres than others. So to summarise, Act 1 is commonly referred to as the setup. Act 2 is commonly referred to as the confrontation, and Act 3 is commonly referred to as the resolution. So Act 1, the setup. This comprises establishment of the book's main elements, i.e. its primary characters will be introduced, both protagonist and antagonist, or to put it more simply, the hero and the villain. The storyline will be revealed. The danger or the threat of the adversary, or the antagonist, is made very clear. In fact, this often takes place in the opening scene. Against the backstory of the threat unfolding, the main character, the hero, protagonist, needs to be established in this time in order to endear or familiarise him or her to the reader. It is essential that this is done in Act 1, because before Act 1 is over, the reader needs to empathise or relate to this character, therefore maximising the reader's interest when, at the end of Act 1, the protagonist crosses paths with and learns the full implications of the underlying threat of the story. Act 1 usually ends on a dramatic note, one which makes it clear that the lead character is now drawn into this threat, which may be an existential one, and it often ends on a cliffhanger. So as an example, I'll choose a movie that I'm sure everybody has seen, for the simple reason that if I choose a book, it's unlikely most of you will have read it. So take Star Wars, which is essentially a captured princess and knights to the rescue fairy tale. In Act 1, the threat and danger of Darth Vader, the antagonist, is revealed immediately. The story is established, i.e. the princess being taken prisoner, and the plans that the evil empire has for domination. And all of this provides the backstory while the lead protagonist, Luke, is introduced and established. He's drawn into the story when he sees Leia's message asking for help. Act 1 ends on a dramatic turning point, when Luke's family are wiped out by the Empire, and this is the point he vows to help. The end of Act 1 is the point where perhaps the mood changes most noticeably into a more dramatic and serious one. And that denotes the onset of Act 2, the confrontation. This act is a little bit more straightforward, in that it starts to spell out the action taken by the protagonist in response to events at the climax of Act 1. He or she will reveal himself to the villain as a rival, and may or may not be taken seriously, but acknowledged nonetheless by the antagonist. As the confrontation escalates between them, then so does the drama, the action, and/or the threat. More characters are introduced in Act 2, and likely recruited as allies by both protagonist and antagonist. All of the main characters will be developed in Act 2, and their backstories and subplots revealed. Act 2 will reach its end at the point at which the final showdown suddenly becomes imminent. The tension of the main plot and all subplots reach their collective peaks. In Star Wars, this is the point at which Ben Kenobi has just been killed, and the Empire is now poised to wipe out the rebellion. And this leads us nicely into Act 3, the resolution. This is the climax, the final sequence in which the antagonist carries out his or her final act of resolution. It's usually a make or break situation, and one which the antagonist will either win or lose, and the stakes will be high. All of the subplots and the heightened tensions throughout the book are brought to their most intense and finally resolved. Of course, in Star Wars, Act 3 is the point at which the Rebels attack the Death Star and the space battle with Darth Vader. Han Solo's question of heroism is also resolved and the villain is defeated. Now, I've chosen an action-packed example that falls firmly within the action, adventure and sci-fi genres, but the 3-act formula doesn't always need to be so dramatic. It's often found in books applied to a wide range of different genres. For example, in a children's fairy tale, Act 1 might end at the point at which Sleeping Beauty bites the apple. In drama, it could be the point at which the protagonist finds out her husband is having an affair. Or in comedy, the point at which the office clown is fired and needs to plan his response. The 3-act formula is traditionally a staple element in the action, thriller, horror and suspense genres, not to mention pulp, chick lit and romance, but it can also be found in most genres and it can be applied to most genres. You may choose not to employ the 3-act structure at all, or you might be thinking that you never have done so. Well, I think you might be surprised. Take another look at your own work and then think just how closely your book does adhere to the 3-act formula, even if you weren't aware of it. And that brings me very nicely onto this lesson's exercise, which is in 2 parts. The first part, as I said, choose one of your own books, any book you've read, or if you prefer, a movie you've seen, in any genre. Make a note of its 3 acts, and write a short summary of where you think each act ends and the next one begins. There are some useful materials in the course notes to help you identify these points, so you may wish to add a short diagram to help yourself. For the second part of the exercise, again, consider a book you've read or a movie you've seen, but this time, try to identify one which doesn't feature a 3-act structure. Then, do an internet search, Google your choice, and see what other people think, whether they've identified ways in which it adheres to the 3-act structure. See if anybody disagrees with you. Again, this is just for fun, but if you would like feedback, you can visit the website and upgrade the course, and I'd be happy to provide it. So, thanks for listening to Genre and the 3-act formula. Now download lesson 3, which is entitled Characters.